John Galloway Love absolutely, positively did not know what rejection meant. John was a 35-year-old sheep farmer living in the middle in 1905, and he might have been the most stubborn man in the whole state. When scrappy Scotsmen arrived in Wyoming, his horses died from poisoned water. Instead of returning to his well-off parents, John walked the last 100 miles and took a job herding other men's cattle. So it was that on October 20th, 1905, when a beautiful young schoolteacher moved into a ranch along the Sweetwater River, John fell madly in love with her, and he started making the chilly 11-hour ride to go see her. The woman was named Ethel Waxham, and she was a 23-year-old college graduate from a good family. She spoke 4 languages. She wrote poetry, and before accepting the teaching job, she had done volunteer work in the slums of New York City. This was an educated, well-to-do woman stepping off a stagecoach in nowhere, Wyoming. When John approached Ethel Waxham, he would have seemed like a good prospect for a husband. He had his own flock of sheep, his own land along Muskrat Creek. He had never been married. He was unfailingly polite, and he had attended college at the University of Nebraska before he had been kicked out. But Ethel had plans to leave the ranch to get her master's degree in Colorado. So when he proposed marriage, she turned him down flat. This is what Ethel said about John in her diary. Quote, "His face was kindly with shrewd blue twinkling eyes, but his voice was most particular and characteristic. Close analysis fails to find a charm of it. A little Scotch dialect, a little slow draw, a little nasal quality." Ethel was intrigued by John, but clearly she was not impressed. But John never gave up. For 5 years he wrote her letters while she was away getting her master's degree, always letting her know his intentions, that he loved her and he wanted to marry her, but he would take whatever she would give. Eventually, Ethel would marry John Love because John was funny and quaint. But most importantly, John was unfazed by rejection, and he was always kind. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no duh on the internet and get to the juicy facts. This is part 2 in a special 2-part episode about rejection. If you'd like to hear about resilience and how to build armor against rejection, you can check out our last episode. Because today, we're talking about rejection part 2, the online dating market.
According to Business Insider, in 2014, Tinder got around 1 billion swipes per day. Compare that to its matches, which were only 12 million per day. That's a rejection of 988 million every day in 2014. Sure, these rejections weren't seen by the user, since it only shows up when Tinder matches you. But imagine if John Galloway Love, our lonely shepherd from Wyoming, was never able to hear the word no in person. What if instead of sending all those love letters, he was ghosted by text? We can't talk about modern rejection without addressing the $3 billion elephant in the room, because that's what the online dating industry has become. It's a $3 billion business. And to keep people hooked on their platform, dating services like Tinder, eHarmony, and Match.com have come to train you to become rejection resilient. Rejection resilience. This is a virtue that used to be rare, and having resilience meant you had grit, like poor old John Love. Consider this. eHarmony UK has, in their official advice section, a subheading called Build Your Resilience. Quote, "One of the best ways to deal with rejection is to feel good about yourself. If you're comfortable in your own skin, authentic when you go on dates, certain in the knowledge what is meant to be viewed won't pass you by, then rejection will be accepted as part of the dating process. Quote, rejection during the dating process can help your relationship in the future. Knowing you can handle it and building your resilience can mean that when you do meet that special someone, you're stronger and more confident.
So that really kind of sounds to me more like marketing. You used a phrase there that they had on their site, which is that, certain in the knowledge that what is meant for you won't pass you by. That almost sounds like serendipity talk. Like they're saying that...
Yeah, it's sales. It's not science. What it's saying is keep using as long as you can. Don't give up.
Right. Please don't give up on love because...
They're dangling that carrot.
Yeah, giving up on love means giving up on our platform, and you're paying for this.
And that last part makes it sound like your self-esteem would be so low, you'll be lucky someone signed off on you at the end.
Right. Or that it's empowering. That language really sounds to me like they're trying to make it sound like rejection is empowering for you, which that's not really true. I mean, we talked on our last episode about building resilience, and it really comes more down to granular labeling than getting rejected on a dating site.
So that's our goal for today's episode. What can we learn from John Love, the master of rejection resilience? And what myths can we bust about the dating rejection? Myth 1. Online dating is a level playing field. Because if it's all on the computer, it should be simple as matching personality tests, right? Myth 2. Women take rejection hardest because they're more in touch with their feelings. Or wait, maybe men take rejection harder because they're more apt to lash out. Myth 3. Elliot Rodger, dubbed the incel killer, murdered 6 people in 2014. And he claimed it was because he was rejected so many times. Is it true? Does rejection by the opposite sex turn us into killers? But before we get into our myths, we want to keep reminding ourselves that dating used to be a slow, brutal process that took work and dedication. That way we can all feel better about being ignored on Tinder and eHarmony.
So that's the part where I'm most interested in, is about this shepherd, because something tells me that it wasn't as easy for him as swiping right on the love of his life. Was he? What did it take for him? Obviously, not just hanging on his cell phone to get Ethel to agree to a date, right?
Well, they were in their very rural Wyoming, so it was the good old days. There were no computers. There was no public transportations. He had to ride a horse 11 hours to see her. So that's not something we could even say we understand.
I'll barely spare more than like 2 paragraphs on a text message. So that's 11 hours. That's a lot.
And Mr. Love was a man's man. He built his ranch with his own hands. He didn't have a construction crew, an architect. He cut down the trees. He built it.
So he wasn't a manufactured home.
And he lived in the middle of nowhere. There were no luxuries like restaurants or a store. So he lived off the land. He was a true cowboy.
So he had to build eHarmony with sticks to get a date with Ethel, is what you're saying.
Now let's remember old supply and demand. He wasn't in New York City, okay? So there weren't a lot of women around. There's probably no women around.
Okay, so that brings us basically to persistence in dating. A lot of people go onto the online market. Oh, by the way, this is the science behind eHarmony and who is actually getting dates online. We can't all be John Love. His level of persistence is insane, as we'll find out during this episode. But people started noticing pretty early on that not everyone was getting dates on eHarmony. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio where half are women, half are men, and they're just connecting people up. Like, it's not like they go down the top of the list. They connect 10s to 10s, 8s to 8s, 9s to 9s. They are letting people pick their own dates, and they're swiping based on their own interests. And they're looking at people's profiles and evaluating each other on their own merits, which means it's a fully biased system. So I've heard guys, I mean, don't look this up because it's kind of crushing and a little bit sad to hear. But there's a lot of people who leave eHarmony and Match and all these dating websites. And a lot of them are guys who leave and they complain that they never get offers. They don't get people asking for dates. They don't get people to communicate with them. So I went digging through the research because I was like, well, how is their match system working up? So in today's market, in today's dating market, just to give you a broad overview, we're going to start broad and then narrow it. Stanford says that 39% of hetero couples today report meeting their partners online. Back in 2009, it was weird if you met somebody who had met their partner online. It was down to 22% in 2009, so it's almost doubled by now. And that's nearly 40%. So we're coming up on 2/5 of people who met their partner online. And here is the data that kind of talks about how the matches go. So this is from a Medium article. It's medium.com. Quote, the bottom 80% of men, in terms of attractiveness, are competing for the top 22% of women. And the top 78% of women are competing for the top 20% of men. And this is by a group called, or a poster called Worst Online Dater. So he's not an actual, he's not a research scientist. He's posting this because he looked at research that came out and a book that came out called Radicalization. So he went online and he treated Tinder like it's an economy by percentages. So the economy is likes and swipes, is how much are people getting paid. And ultimately what he's saying is that the top 80% of women are competing for the top 20% of men. So if you're...
So 80% are being ignored.
Yes. If you are not one of the top 20% men in attractiveness and ability...
This to me sounds like a clothes dryer that no one catches anybody. or very small percentage of the clothes get dry.
Right. When we talk persistence and resilience against rejection... This is where the rubber meets the road. Online dating, to me, I mean, you're going to get rejected. In our last episode, we talked about jobs and writing groups and things like that. If you're looking to date online, you really quite literally have to build a very unique type of resistance to rejection. Now, there's a graph sitting in our doc, and this is widely available if you look for this on Google. Just write in how men rate women and how women rate men. And this is for OkCupid. I mentioned Radicalism. It's a book by the author or the programmer who made OkCupid. And it means that over the course of the dating website's life, men have been rating women based on looks. Same thing with women. Women will go through other people's profile and they'll rate them based on looks. Now, what you should have, ideally, if people are being unbiased, they're just rating others like on a scale of 1 to 10, like hot or not. If you're a man rating women, on that scale, if you look at the men's ratings, it's almost a perfect bell curve. So this is men rating women. You would think that a lot of people in public speaking, they say that pornography, online pornography, has skewed men to devalue women. That they don't think women are attractive enough because they're used to seeing porn stars online.
Sexual objects.
They're sexual objects, yeah. They've turned women into objects. However, this OkCupid graph on how men rate women, it is a perfect bell curve. The majority of the literal average, more than the bulk of men rate people at the average.
Spoiler: women's isn't.
Okay. Yeah. Spoiler. Yes. So it's I like how I like your pure enjoyment from seeing this graph, and now that you now that you're picking up on it. Yeah. The men's is a perfect bell curve. There are the same amount of ones as there are tens. Like men have a very, very predictable and almost mathematic system of rating, and because it shows such an easy natural average, it looks like men are actually pretty even with their rating. how women rate men according to Radicalism and OkCupid statistics is wildly low. So again, I encourage everyone to look up this graph on their own. We'll have a link off to our website because rating from, let's see, there are 7 bars here, so it's almost a 1 to 10. Women skew men all the way down in ratings, so they rate almost no men as perfect 10s. That it's lower than 0%. The next one down, so like the rating of like a 7 or 8, there's only 2% in that category, and it goes up the lower you go. So women are skewing men that they're looking at lower on average until the bulk of all men are basically 2s and 3s according to women. So those two graphs, men have basically a statistically average eye for women. They rate everybody on sort of this bell curve. Women devalue men on OkCupid or lower their stat value on this.
I can see them digging into each one and looking a little harder.
Yeah.
And men looking for someone who's in their league.
Yes, there's some truth to that. I think you're right. And Todd and I right now, we're looking at a graph and we're about to put our own biases into what we're seeing. So don't take us for scientists. But I think there is some of guys are looking for people who are in their league. And there's also a little bit of guys are more visual. Like the science, there have been tests to prove this, that we look and our survival as a species is somewhat dependent on guys being visual and using visual to be able to gauge potential partners. It's so hard for me to not just like at every statement to be like, guys are dogs, they look at women as visual objects, but this is how the statistics shake out is men are apparently better at gauging the average, whereas women skew men far below the average, the bulk of men far below the average.
Can I say it?
What?
Women are being too hard on us.
A little bit. That's what this isn't our opinion. Statistically, women are putting more men below the average than the average would support. So I think that's the most diplomatic way we can say it. And nobody feels good about this, by the way. So what we said at the beginning of this, that 80% of women are fighting for the top 20% of men on dating websites. This is basically held up across the board, and this doesn't make anyone feel better. This is a study from the APA. If you're wondering how people feel using dating websites, this survey was for women. They were trying to find out how women felt while they were on dating websites. So they studied 1,044 women and 273 men. And, quote, whether they're swiping left or right, male users of the popular dating app Tinder appear to have lower levels of self-esteem, and all users appear to have negative perceptions of body than those who don't use the app. And then this also from the APA, quote, Tinder users report having lower levels of satisfaction with their faces and bodies and having lower levels of self-worth than the men and women who did not use Tinder. And this is from Jessica Struble, who's a PhD at the University of North Texas, who that's what they pulled for this article. So basically that tells me that yes, the what we're competing for online is skewed. If you're not in that top 20% of men, you really, really need rejection resilience because women aren't going to pay attention to you nearly as much unless you're in that top 20%. And whether you're a man or woman, you feel bad using a dating website. Like inherently, it lowers your self-esteem.
Yeah, because you've been there for a decade.
Right. Now we're gonna get into this a bit more. So spoiler, there is a good outlook, a positive outlook, and the positive takeaway for me is what we said right at the top of this, which is 40% of people do meet their match online. So there is hope, and resilience is the biggest part of that I can see from the data. And since that resilience is such an important part of our story today, could I ask you, how is Ethel doing with John paying her this attention and coming to see her all the time?
Ethel was a special woman. She wrote in her diary about how she was an educated person. She going to Wellesley from a good family, and we've done some study about the social class at the time.
Yeah.
Not a likely wife material for a farmer.
Right. A shepherd who got kicked out of college, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she did volunteer. She loved children. She spoke 4 languages. She loved writing, poetry, which is not really what you think would be a good fit for him working on the farm.
The most poetry most farmers I met know are curse words. That's the biggest poetry they do.
Feed the effing pigs, right?
Right.
Now she moved to Wyoming. Now where they were in Wyoming was so remote. And this will, 1905. The ink wells, because they used to write with those, would be frozen. That's how cold it was. So there's no forced furnace with air conditioning.
Right. All right, students, take out your ink block and try to write with that.
But she melted my heart when I was reading about her. She said she had 7 students, and they were very different than the kids that she grew up with. They had none of them could read. They were very simple, and she would ask them questions, and they would answer in a whole other universe. And she used to be just joy about just how beautiful these people were. So she was a special kind of person, and she wanted to become more educated so she could become a better educator. So she could come back and help these kids.
Oh.
A remarkable woman.
Educated and big-hearted. So
and beautiful.
Totally get why John was into her. That makes sense.
And 23-year-olds and beautiful.
Yeah. 23-year-old school teacher. So John had something going for him there.
Great taste.
So we picked this because we have evidence of their courtship. This is such a great story because on eHarmony you only get so many words before somebody rejects you. John sent letters, non-stop letters to Ethel once she had left the ranch.
And then she said what nice it was to have a couple of letters in hand before she wrote back, so she could answer 1 for 2.
Right. It tells you how often he was writing. Is she would stack a few up before answering them.
And it tells you about her her personality.
Yeah.
She's a firecracker, man.
Yeah, no, after reading these letters, I kind of love them both. So would you mind reading a couple of examples of John's letters?
Dear Miss Waxham, I for one am glad your curiosity led you to drift up here to Wyoming. And now my supreme desire in life is to persuade you to come back. With love and kisses, ever yours, John Love. Now this is her response.
Okay.
This I love. Dear Mr. Love, since you began to sign your name as you do, you must have known that I would not like it and would not continue. Since we are only friends, I wrote you not to expect any more letters from me unless you stopped it. Ethel Waxham.
So she's not having his freshness.
No, it's inappropriate. And she puts him right in the friend zone.
Yeah.
She said, bro, don't talk to me like that. I'm not your...
So can I read his response real quick? Once he got the knock it off with that love and kisses nonsense. His response is, Dear Miss Waxham, I will always sign all letters properly in the future. Please forgive my error in the past. I suppose that I ought to be satisfied with your friendship, but I won't be. Yours sincerely, John G. Love.
This is some old school flirting.
It is. It absolutely is.
I love it.
I think the big lesson, if we can put this into a modern context, it's that he didn't start becoming sort of like just like friend zone, like whatever you say. He lets his intention be clear every single time he writes her, but he's always polite. Like he switches to, yes, I'll address you as you want. I'll be polite, but I will never obfuscate what I want. So I think that's fantastic.
I think so too. And it's not wasting her time or his.
Right. Yeah. No one's wasting everyone's time. So this kind of brings me to another point, which we want to make about rejection. Which gender feels it the hardest? Which gender feels it more keenly, men or women? And of course, the listeners know this. We can only really speak to the male point of view for this. I know people listening might think we're being hard on women, especially with the radicalism part, but we really want to break down the science of who reacts worse and how do people react gender-wise. And I want to start by asking you, Todd, as a male, how hard have you taken rejection in the past?
I've always feel like I'm oversensitive. Too sensitive for a man. And I know it sounds not like I'm trying to be macho or anything, but I feel like it bothers me for longer than it does most people. And it probably doesn't. Everyone probably feels that way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times men will mask their feelings with how they were screwed over. which is the same thing as being heartbroken, but they
Right.
go a little more aggressive. But they're not really
Yes.
telling how they really feel.
That is such a great way to say it. We're going to get into that aggressiveness. A lot of today's episode is about how men feel justified being aggressive after being rejected. So that's your personal. That's how you respond to rejection.
Well, I got a story.
I'd love to hear it.
I've been rejected a lot, so Joe put in the notes to find a business rejection or personal rejection. I had a long list, man, as long as my arm. So I could
its
probably
own
do top
episode.
3. Yeah, exactly. But I'm gonna give you one that. So I was very involved in this yoga studio, and I would go 5 times a week, and I was very involved in the community. I went to all their parties. I knew all the instructors. I knew the owners. It was my whole social outlet. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the women there she was perfect for me. She was my type. She was my age. She was beautiful and brilliant, and I had the biggest crush on her. She was interested in me. We went out. I had a great time. She broke up with me really fast. And I was shocked because I liked her so much. I didn't understand, right?
Right.
I was really floored because I kind of, when you've been in some relationships, you see that this is a good mate, or you're heading a certain way. I was devastated. So I go back to the yoga studio, and now it's kind of embarrassing because she told nobody about it. I told everybody about it. So I'm saying I'm going to go back to the store. I'm waiting in the bathroom, and I look up, and we're all in line. It's a small studio. There's a poster of her next special event that she's doing at the thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I have to see her picture. So then I go into class, and because she has an upcoming event there, she does these seminar things. Every single time we do a class, they talk about how great she is and how we need to go to her class. Wow. It was just like taking this knife, and they're saying, she's such a beautiful woman. She's such a talented dancer and singer. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I can't only take so much of this. Tell them what she did to me.
Right. Well, having a reminder every time you go to... Did you find a different yoga studio? What was the answer to that?
I'm proud that I stuck in there. I think
good.
I was just there was just so much love and community there. I just couldn't leave it. And long term, I'm glad I did, but it was painful for a long time because every time I went there, it's what I thought of.
Yeah. I'll briefly share. I am so averse to not just rejection, but judgment. I do stupid things to avoid both rejection and judgment. So I've gone out on horrible dates where I've been rejected. My answer is always, as soon as I sense rejection, I leave. Like to the point where I won't have a ride home, and I'll walk out of a bar and just be like, well, see you later. And then I'm just like walking home for 10 miles. One of my favorites was I'm very naive. So I was in college and I was taking a math class, and there's a woman who sat by me every day. It wasn't group seating. It wasn't like one table was 4 people around it in a circle. No, it was individual seats. She would come sit at my table pretty much every day. And by the end of the math class, I was so confused and so blind to other people and their intentions with me. I loaned her a math tutorial because I thought she was that bad at math. Why is she sitting by me for the the 30th day in a row?
Hint.
Yeah, hint, right. And she came in and she had her hair done and she looked really nice, she was all dressed up. And I think it was the last day of class, so she was trying to put out as best a hint as possible. She might as well have thrown a cocktail napkin in my face.
Exactly. And she's winking at you.
Right, and I was like, here's a tutorial book that helped me. See you later. And I just walked out. And then a year later, I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, that was probably, you big idiot. That was a hint. Yeah.
That was opportunity.
Right.
But you're thinking that you probably were so afraid of looking foolish, or
that's it.
Of reaching out romantically and then have it shut down. That you said it's not worth the try.
Right. Or when I do try to pick up on someone and I get rejected. Like I said, I there's no let me persist like John Love. No, there would have been no letters to Ethel Waxham. I would have rode the 11 hours the moment she was like, no, you're weird and nasally. It would have been me riding 11 hours back within minutes. It just would have been like, well, let me get on my horse. So.
I think that's common with a lot of people. Like, it stops your momentum. It doesn't just stop you and you think, oh, the next person asks is going to say yes because these three said no. You don't think that way. You wait three more opportunities to go again.
Right.
Like, you don't just lose momentum, you go in reverse.
Right. Yeah, there's a U-turn that happens. So with that out of the way, us telling the listener our biases, and
I feel better actually to get it out.
Yeah, it is kind of nice. It's cathartic. The good news and the bad news is men and women have different reactions to rejection, and that's really a no-duh statement. I know that people listening are like, yeah, of course they do. But we're going to look at two different studies that talk about how we actually react to rejection and why it's different than how Hollywood portrays it and how we think about it. So first up, a study from the University of Toronto. They wanted to see how women took acceptance and rejection from men. And it was they made up fake profiles, fake dating profiles. And women were given accepted and rejected notices from men at random. And they were picking from two men. One was the high status male, and the other one was the low status male. So they would have these guys that physically look, like very, very obviously one's better looking than the other. And women, when they reacted to the high status males who rejected them. Okay, so actually, I'm going to do this a little bit different. Todd, in movies, there's like 70s. There's like a really famous director that did like 16 Candles and Pretty in Pink and all these movies. Usually what happens is there's like a guy following around the attractive woman.
He wins her over in the end.
He wins her over in the end. Usually she gets rejected by the jock, and then he wins her over.
The jock treats her like garbage, and this guy worships her, and finally she comes around.
She comes around, yes. Yeah. So the part where she comes around might be complete and total fiction, according to the study. So again, we're busting myths here. So when women were rejected by the high status men, they had a high degree of what's called derogatory, or they derogated the men, meaning that they would get rejected, and then they would start bad-mouthing the high status men who rejected them. And instead of going to the lower status male, basically instead of doing the pretty and
lowering their standard,
instead of John Hughes movies lowering their standards and going with the guy who accepted them, they rejected both. They were statistically more likely to reject both the high status male who rejected them and the low status male who wanted them. They would reject both and basically double down on their own standards, their own number.
So then go for even more higher attractive.
Yeah, they would continue going for high status males. And this to me, I tried afterwards, so this is just my interpretation of this study. I tried to understand on an evolutionary basis why that's happening, why that would be a good thing. Because one would think that being rejected by a high status male means your next move is go toward a lower number. So if you get rejected by a 7, why not go for a 6 or a 5? But it really actually makes sense in a tribal way. If you are in a tribe and you know that you personally are a 6, your number will go down the moment you pick a lower status male. If you pick up on a caveman 3,
lowers your stock.
Then suddenly your stock plummets.
Everyone knows it without,
Right, and that's you forever. It fixes your number. So it actually, after reading this this completely Hollywood-ruining, movie-ending ruining study, I realized that it actually kind of made sense to our evolution, that you would want to continue being a harsh selector after a high-status male had rejected you. So now we're going to the other side of the studies. This is from an Australian study, and it's the journal... Journal of Aggressive Behavior, and it tested 150 hetero men who were showed pre-recorded videos of sexualized, in quotes, or non-sexualized women. And this was taken during a fake university dating site. And the way they gauge this, I'll read it the way they state it in the study, so I don't sound like I'm perving on women in a study, because that's not happening. This is all by text. They looked at women who were wearing neutral clothing, who said they were not open to casual sex. That's one profile the men were presented. The other profile was women in, quote, attractive clothing, who said they were open to casual sex. So literally, here's a sex object, here's a woman who's not a sex object, and they had men try to get a date with them on this fake online dating service. Now, the way they did this is they would have, again, like the other study, they'd be randomly rejected by either the sexualized woman or the neutral woman. And then they were given, after this test, so it was, which one do you want? And the guys would say, I want to date with this woman. And then they would either be rejected or they weren't, depending if they were in the control group. And then after being rejected, the men would be given a reaction test, meaning they were sitting at the computer and they had to react to something on the screen, like they click a button fast or something. And they were given the option to play against the women who had been on the quote-unquote dating profile. And so they were given the option to punish the women who were losing this game against them. So if they reacted quickly to whatever's on the screen, they could blast the other person with white noise. So they're both wearing headphones, and the punishment was this annoying, screeching noise sound in their ears. And I hope this doesn't surprise you too much. The men who had been rejected by potential sexual partners, the sexualized women, they were more willing to be more aggressive and to punish the women more with these settings. So when they would win on this game, they would blast, their numbers were higher. They could choose how high the blast was going to be. And they would blast the sexualized women with higher amounts of noise and with more frequency.
I just totally believe that. Poor sports.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the men who had been rejected by sexualized women were poor sports about it, and they were willing to be aggressive about it. Now that brings me to, again, Joe's tribal takeaway, which is this goes for any mammal almost. Like, it's not just humans. It's if you are a male and you are rejected by a female, your next move is to reassert dominance, reassert your aggressiveness, because your number is tied to how aggressive you are, how much testosterone you have, which makes it especially dangerous for the women who are doing the rejecting. And again, we're going into no-duh territory with the news, and with how often we see rejected men get violent. But this is sort of an unbiased test that shows that men's propensity to become violent after rejection is definitely there.
And I have a 20-something story on this. When we go out in my early 20s, all young men together, and we'd be out drinking in a bar, and there's groups of men, groups of women. There's always a rule we have for a reason. It's called whoever. If you meet up with a group of women and you're talking, whoever the women choose is what we go with.
Yeah.
Because what happens is the men get jealous, and the girl likes your buddy, and next thing you know, we're fist fighting in the parking lot.
Right.
It would happen every night if we didn't have that rule that says if Ashley likes David, we all back off.
Right. That's a
we
good
don't
rule.
get jealous and beat each other up, because it would happen.
Yeah.
Too much testosterone.
Too much testosterone. Too much need to prove yourself after a rejection. Just generally, I think.
To blame.
Yeah. So that leads me to, I suppose, our next history point. How in the heck did John win her back? Because John Gallo, our shepherd from 1905, he doesn't seem to be having much luck even in his letters. Like, he's sending these polite letters. So how does he eventually win her?
In a word, persistence.
Okay.
He continued to write her. He was a gentleman, and he always let his intentions known.
Okay, those are good rules.
He'd share his letters sincerely, and he'd always follow up, and he always made her sure that it know that his marriage was his intentions.
So he wasn't trying to sneak in there by being in the friend zone and pouncing on her at some point. Every time he could, he said what he wanted.
Yes. Being honest and persistent paid off.
Okay. And was this reflected in their correspondence?
Well, let me read just a couple of real short letters. Now, this whole story started in 1905. Now we're in 1909.
Okay, so he has been sending her letters now for like 4 years.
It's not an email thing like we're used to. Dear Miss Waxel, there is no use in my fixing up the house anymore, papering, etc., until I know how it should be done. And I won't know that until you see it and say how it ought to be fixed. If you never see it, I don't want it fixed, for I don't want to live here. We could live very comfortably in the wagon while our house was being fixed up to suit you. If only you'd say yes. John Love. So right there he's saying, come nest this house. I'm going to build it for you.
I like that.
That's very sweet.
Yeah.
And I'll burn the thing down.
Yeah, tell me how I should decorate this place. That's cool.
And this is her response. Dear Mr. Love, suppose that you lost everything that you have and a little more. And suppose that for the best reason in the world, I wanted you to ask me to say yes. What would you do?
So basically she's saying, what if I actually said yes?
She's coming around 5 years later.
Yeah, 5 years and dozens of letters later.
I bet his hands were shaking when he read this.
Oh my God. Can you imagine that reaction?
I'm surprised he didn't walk to Denver.
Right? Yeah. Like he did walking into Wyoming. He's wearing out shoes.
He certainly put his time in. So this is his response. Dear Miss Waxel, if I were with you, I would throw my arms around you and kiss you and wait eagerly for that kiss that I've waited 4 years for. John Love.
That's awesome. That's very sweet.
That means she does and he does.
By the way, these letters are available on pbs.org. It's from the West program called PS I Like You, and they're all very heartwarming. But that one,
if you read these, you're going to be in a good mood. You can't read this stuff and not smile.
Absolutely.
We skip through them, but they're all good.
Yeah. No, I like that he eventually won her over by being honest and persistent.
But they'll be in our show notes on our blog for sure.
Very cool. I like that. So we teased up top, and we teased it last week too, that we're going to talk about the incel killer. His name was Elliot Rodger. And this isn't so much science. We're really just talking about how that study that we talked about, where men are willing to react aggressively when they are rejected. Why doesn't that always lead to murder, basically? If the online community, if dating online is rejecting 80% of men regularly, according to that Radicalism and those online dating studies, how do we not have 80% of online dating males just walking around with shotguns?
Because it's the army of resentment and loneliness, which is unhealthy too.
Right. It would look like The Purge if all men were reacting to rejection online like these killers. So first off, let's talk about Elliot Rodger, the incel killer. In 2014, he got bitter and angry, and he talked about how no women wanted to sleep with him. So this is the guy that went out in Isla Vista, California, and he went on a shooting and stabbing spree. He grew up in privilege. He was the son of a Hollywood filmmaker, and he drove his family's BMW. So he really he had a lot of affluence. He had expectations. He was basically became for a year or two the poster boy of the rejected male, and people were really very concerned that this would breed more online hate. And eventually it did. There's another murderer who came out. His name was Alec Minassian, and he was radicalized basically by misogynist videos online. And another fun fact for you, the incel community was started by a woman who was invented the term and invented the website, the first incel website, because she wanted a support group for men and women who were being rejected to the point where they didn't have a significant other. So this all started with fairly good intention, but it was hijacked by basically hate groups. There are shades of this. So, I've delved briefly into MGTOW, which is men going their own way. These are men who have decided that they've been rejected so much that they're done messing around with women. They think that The whole idea of spending money on getting married and getting hooked into a contract with a woman and spending money on dating, none of it's worth it. Incel is a little bit more volatile. Like you look at the incel community and it looks a little bit more radical. People talk about being red-pilled online. And there are so many YouTube videos that come up about basically hating women. Like a lot of this boils down to shades of hating the opposite sex because they have been rejected too much. So these people, your Alec Minassian and your Elliot Rodger, these people are not your typical rejected people of society. These aren't just men who are going out and murdering because they got rejected. These really are people who are getting hardened by their rejection. They get radicalized by joining online groups. And they kind of use their own politicized language. They surround themselves by one answer. Like if all their activity online leads them to women are the devil for not accepting them, or they start seeing people, what this guy, Elliot Rodger, called women and men who dated, they called them Chads and Stacys, which is a sort of a dehumanizing term to what's that?
They're not aiming their hate at the women who rejected them. It's at just women generally.
Women generally, yes.
Which is even weirder too, and even scarier.
Scarier, weirder, and
they're both scary, but
yeah. When he killed men, Elliot Rodger killed both men and women, and he called them Chads, which means guys that are in that top 20%. The guys that all women are hitting on, that top 20% are called Chads according to these hate groups, and it really is more about these guys aren't learning resilience. They're not learning techniques. They're not picking up on maybe I should become more socially aware. They're just deciding that they're tired of rejection and that it's easier if they listen to other people who are angry than it is to listen to anything that would be proactive or productive.
And our conversation this offline was that we both turn it internally about what's wrong with us.
Yeah.
I'm not good enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm not whatever.
Right. You and I point to ourselves and say, what haven't I done right? These guys are pointing to women and saying, well, if 80% of women are picking the top 20% of men, there's something wrong with them. And their answer to that is to basically get online and be very vitriolic and angry about it.
It's disgusting. It's sick.
Right. So we don't all have to take the Elliot Rodger way out. You do not have to become angry or radicalized when you get rejected. You really can learn resilience. And the answer to me, looking at this data, is either become that top 20% for a short time, basically look to yourself for improvement, look to become that top 20%, or get off the internet. Don't be part of that 40% of men and women who find their significant other online. Go looking for yourself in the real world. And that is such a hard thing to say to people my age, millennials, is get offline if you're not finding an answer there. But it really does seem to be a better answer because, like we said in the earlier study, using online dating websites and getting rejected constantly destroys your ego.
So get really good at something and get on a different roller coaster.
Right, exactly. Specialize in something, get improvement, and then find another venue. So I would like to assume that it was after our John Love and Ethel Waxham got together that it was a Disney ending. But I have a little bit of a feeling that Todd may be spoiling that for us.
That's a sad thing about this. This is what true love is about. So she moves in with him and becomes a rancher with him.
Out on Muskrat Creek. They're ranchers now.
His dream for her was to have a prosperous future, to be rich. Big herds of livestock, orchards, fields of grain, lots of money. But their first winter together, the Loves lost 8,000 sheep and 50 cattle.
Holy cow.
Yeah, Ethel had a miscarriage, so their first baby was lost. And then a year later, they rebounded a little bit. They still had some property, and they still had some crops and some cattle. They got flooded. She had a baby. they got flooded. They were floating around on the mattresses. So this is in 2 years. They've had two natural disasters.
Wow.
The bankers came. This is the good old days. There was no, mortgage restructure or whatever. They looked at this ruins. They looked at the land. The house was gone. It was destroyed. And they foreclosed on the property.
Oh, wow.
So they were homeless. They lost a baby. And after this, John said to her, he said, why don't you leave me? I would not blame you. I promised you all these things that I haven't delivered. And she said, I will never leave you.
Oh, wow. That is fantastic.
So he had to start over. What he did was, a man's a man. He went and he worked as a sheep herder for $40 a month, which wasn't a lot of money back then either.
Right.
As the years passed, there were even more setbacks. They had a fire that destroyed a bunch of the ranch buildings. They missed the Wyoming oil boom. So they could have been rich off of oil. Oil came through, and all good luck missed them, just hard times.
Jeez.
Disease they had another hit to they lost another 8,000 sheep.
So their monopoly board is getting wiped out every couple of years, basically.
They also had a bank fail. So a bank went out of business. So they had all their money at Chase, and then it was gone.
Oh, so it's not even a natural disaster. It's like literally their money just gets winked out of existence.
I don't know why we're laughing. This is a very sad love story. But they stayed together, John and Ethel Love, for 37 years at Muskrat Creek. They
didn't leave after all the flooding?
They watched all their children grow off, go to college, and become very successful. One of their daughters was a chemist. Their son Alan was a design engineer, and David became a geologist. So they had a beautiful, successful family, which is what all parents want as true success in the end.
That is awesome. That's a good ending.
So this is 5 years of resilience, 37 years of marriage with 4 kids, 40 disasters that would take down any family.
Right.
Now, today's standard, we watch a show like The Bachelor, right? They're madly in love, and then guess what? 6 months later, they're in divorce court.
Right. Together within a season, they fall in love. Within 6 months, they're divorced. Yeah. Before we get to our call to action, would you accept this rose?
We've come a long way from having to ride 11 hours to the local ranch to hit on the new teacher. Not to mention the 5 years of letters before we could score a date. Now we're dealing with billions of invisible online rejections every day, in an industry that thrives on making you feel like you can score if you toughen up. When in reality, the matches are skewed so that 80% of heterosexual women fight over the top 20% of men. We're told that men shouldn't feel rejection, like our sheep farmer, John Love, when in reality, men feel rejection keenly, and they're willing to punish the women who reject them. Likewise, women who get rejected by high-value mates aren't likely to adjust their standards downward like Hollywood portrays. Instead, they're just as likely to double down their own social value, spurning both options in the process. The cycle of rejection may seem like it's designed to turn men into monsters, like the incel killers. However, with persistence, we still see 40% of couples meeting online. Which means, just maybe, there's a little John Love and Ethel Waxham in all of us. Clearly, some of us are willing to keep writing those texts long after the other side has stopped answering. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect to us at www.re-engineeredyou.com, where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback. We love spirited debates. And if you just want to ghost us by text, you can do that too.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.
And speaking of opinions on everything, I've got another review here to read, if you're into it.
Please.
So here's a 5-star review from Nick Gerasimchuk. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
I don't know.
Okay. Nick, I apologize for butchering your name. Send me the pronunciation.
Your Ukraine is better than mine.
Yeah. He wrote 10 out of 10. One of the few podcasts I listen to for the voice. It's very inviting but also well informative. Love the dialogue and how easy to follow along because it's well organized and straight to the point. One listen got me hooked. Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you. We love you, brother.
And we would love to hear from anybody else. Leave us a review on Apple Podcast, and we will read it during one of our episodes.